Like when you had prohibition was changed. All right.
Right.
And what they had to do was they had to have a constitutional convention in order to change it. All right. Go ahead and read that.
Yeah, from Wikipedia, New York Constitution. The Constitution of the State of New York establishes the structure of the government of the State of New York.
Now you notice the State of New York is different from New York State. The State of New York is different from New York State. At one time, you had New York State Constitution, which means it's a constitution for the continental New York, or the contiguous New York State. In 1938, they called the Constitution for the State of New York. The State of New York really goes back to the federal government. Mm-hmm. Right, it goes back. That's when they were connected, for lack of a better term, to D.C. Mm-hmm. That's why the federal government, D.C., has jurisdiction over the State of New York and not New York State.
Right.
Okay? This is the term, the State of New York, is a federal term.
Yeah.
Okay? That's how they turned all the contiguous states into the federal state.
Yep.
And like I said, they did away with Constitution. They no longer recognize constitutional or common law marriages in 1938. Okay? Now, in 1933, I believe it was March 9th of 1933, FDR filed bankruptcy.
Yeah, March 9th. Yep.
March 9th, 1933. And what did he do at that same time? He put out an order. Stating that everybody has to turn in their gold to the federal authorities. And what they did was they built this thing in Kentucky, Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Yeah, Kentucky. Yeah.
They built this thing to keep the gold in there.
Okay.
Now, no one's ever. Well, you might see a documentary channel on Fort Knox, but there's no way you can actually. I can't go to Kentucky and say, look, I want to go and see how much gold is up in there. Man, they'll arrest my ass. At one time when they built it, when you check out the early pictures, when they built it up, you can walk right by it.
They had it on display.
Then what they did was they put a fence around it. Then they put guards around it. Basically, you can't even drive by it, man.
That's right.
And they had one, Eustace Mullins spoke about this, where they were speaking, I think it was Eustace Mullins, where they were talking about, there was one congressman that questioned whether there was gold in there. And they took him in there, and they picked up one gold bar. Yeah. And they said, here's a gold. Yeah. And he wasn't able to test it to see if it was tungsten or gold-plated brick.
Yep.
Now, none of these presidents have ever mentioned in a recession, in a depression, well, look, we got the gold in there.
Yep.
Now, when we confiscated the gold from the American people, the gold was worth 20. You had what was called a $20 gold certificate. It had 20 on it, like you got your $20 bill, and it said on the demand, paid to the bearer on demand, 1 troy ounce of gold.
Right.
That same gold today, that same 1 troy ounce of gold is now worth almost $1,300. It really should be worth about $3,000. But what these elite, I would say, what they're doing is they're manipulating the prices to keep the gold down to a certain number and the silver down to a certain number. The silver is right now is $19 and some cents. Sometimes it'll go up to 20. It'll come back down to 19. Sometime it'll go up to 21. It'll go back down to 19. It might go down to 18. It'll stay between 19 and 20, 19 and 21. The silver should be somewhere around $250 right about now, man. But what the elite are doing is they're manipulating the prices, man. Because when everything goes up, when your gas prices, your food prices, everything goes up, gold should go up right with it, man. Silver should go up right with it. Anyway, let's get back to what we're talking about. In 1933, it was FDR during his administration that the federal government declared bankruptcy. Now, when you declare bankruptcy, you can't operate anymore as a corporation or as a government. So you can't tell people what to do. The only way you can tell people what to do is if they agree to a contract with you. Like when you go to the the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment.
Yeah.
That came about. Matter of fact, go to that. Get another tab.
Yeah, because the 13th Amendment so-called abolished slavery, and turn it into it could be voluntary. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States. So it basically became a thing of you could be a voluntary slave, but you couldn't be an involuntary slave.
But you don't even know that you're volunteering. You
want me to read about the 14th Amendment?
Yeah, just go to the 13th verse. Go to the 13th. You know what? Forget about it. The 13th Amendment says this.
Yeah.
Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States except for the punishment of crime. That's why when they lock you, and that's another way they got you as slaves. All prisoners are slaves.
Yeah.
Okay? You commit a crime, you're going into slavery.
Well,
the prison system is a series of slave camps. Okay? So they circumvented. Now you see a Negro saying, "Well, he's just in prison. He ain't a slave. We're free." No, you ain't free, man.
To add to the Elder Tar, first of all, we are slaves because we're using Federal Reserve notes, which is debt currency. Debt currency is the currency of slaves. There's an old saying, how's it go? Gold is the currency of kings, silver is the currency of gentlemen, and debt is the currency of what? Slaves. And that's what we're using. The Federal Reserve notes that we're using is debt-based currency. So it's a currency of slaves. So we're all slaves.
Yeah, and in other words, when during the FDR administration, when bankruptcy, when the federal government was became bankrupt, that made everything else null and void. Mm-hmm. That made the people, the so-called peoples of these United States, they were actually free people, and there was no authority that could make you do anything, man. Okay, that's why prior to 1933, and even 5 years after 1933, in the state of New York, you had what was called common law. Common law comes out of England, Great Britain.
That's right.
The whole concept of the common law is you have the Constitution, then you have common law. Common law is case law. Like you have the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. There was a guy by the name of, I believe his name is Carlos Miranda, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and he was arrested. This was in the 60s. And basically, they didn't read him as right. They didn't notify him of his Fifth Amendment right as to not to be a witness against himself. Mm-hmm. So it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it became law, which is common law. That's why when the cop says you have the right to remain silent, you have a right to blah, 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 you have a right to have an attorney. What he's doing is he's Mirandizing you.
That's what they call it.
The word Mirandize comes from the man, I believe his name. His first name is Carlos Miranda.
Okay.
And he used to actually have a cards where he would bring the card out to the cop and say, look, you got to read me my rights. And he used to pass it out to people. And that's where the term Mirandize come from. When a police officer Mirandizes you, it goes back to the Fifth Amendment. But when you had the Miranda versus Arizona, I'm going back to my Lord days. Miranda, I'm real rusty. Miranda versus Arizona, what happened was you had what was called a case law, which is common law. So you can tell a cop, I refuse to be a witness against myself pursuant to the Fifth Amendment.